"You're being replaced, effective immediately," my husband Joel said, sliding the termination papers across his mahogany desk. His secretary Cherry stood beside him, her hand possessively on his shoulder. "The board agrees we need someone more innovative in your position." I signed without argument, gathered my things, and walked out with my head high. What they didn't know was that tomorrow, everything would change. The morning had started like any other. I arrived at Danfield Technologies at 7:30 a.m. earlier than most executives, a habit I'd maintained throughout my 15 years with the company. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The headquarters, a sleek glass building in downtown Seattle, had always felt like a second home. I'd watched it grow from a modest 3-story office to the 12-floor monument to innovation it was today. In many ways, my life story was etched into its walls. As Vice President of Product Development, my office occupied the corner of the 10th floor with a stunning view of Puget Sound. The space was organized, functional, a reflection of my approach to business. No unnecessary decorations, just strategic awards placed where visiting clients could see them. The only personal touch was a small silver frame on my desk, a picture from my wedding day 10 years ago. Joel and I had looked so happy then, so full of promise. The irony wasn't lost on me that the frame was the first item I packed into my box that afternoon. The email had come at 9:17 a.m. "Please report to the CEO's office at 2 p.m. for an urgent discussion." From Joel's executive assistant, not from my husband directly. That should have been my first clue. Throughout our marriage, our professional and personal lives had maintained careful boundaries. As company founder and CEO, Joel respected my department's autonomy, and I never leveraged our relationship for professional advantage. But lately, those boundaries had blurred, or rather, new boundaries had formed, excluding me from both my husband's professional and personal confidences. The changes had been subtle at first. Late meetings that extended into late dinners, weekend calls that required his immediate attention, the gradual emotional withdrawal that I'd attributed to the stress of our recent expansion into European markets. I'd been so focused on my own projects, particularly our new healthcare monitoring system that promised to revolutionize patient care, that I'd missed the signs until they became impossible to ignore. Cherry Winters had joined Danfield Technologies 8 months ago, arriving with impeccable references and a resume that boasted experience at 2 of our competitors. Joel had hired her personally, unusual for an executive assistant position, but he'd explained that finding the right fit for his working style was crucial during our expansion phase. I'd welcomed her warmly, even invited her to our home for the company holiday party. She was efficient, polished, with a knack for anticipating needs before they were voiced. In meetings, she somehow always managed to support Joel's points while appearing merely to clarify them. It was an impressive skill, one I'd admired professionally, without recognizing its implications. 3 weeks ago, I'd forgotten my tablet after a late budget meeting. Returning to the conference room, I'd overheard their voices through the not-quite-closed door. "The board members are aligned," Cherry's voice, intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. "Tobias and Lucian are completely on your side. We just need to handle the domestic situation." Joel's laugh, low, conspiratorial, was one I'd never heard before. "Let me worry about Amy. Once the reorganization is announced, her position becomes redundant anyway. It's just business." "And us?" Cherry asked. "Is that just business too?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I'd walked away quietly, tablet forgotten, and driven home in a fog of disbelief. That night, when Joel came home past midnight, I pretended to be asleep, buying myself time to think. The next morning, I'd acted normal, or as normal as possible when your world has imploded, and watched as he performed his own role of devoted husband with newfound awareness of its hollowness. For 3 weeks, I'd observed their interactions. With fresh eyes, caught the lingering glances, the subtle touches, the private smiles. More disturbing was how they'd begun to isolate me professionally. My emails required longer response times. My project updates were rescheduled. Strategic meetings happened without my knowledge, only to be casually referenced later. I'd built the product division from nothing. When Joel had first founded Danfield with his college roommate Lucienne, I'd been there, working nights and weekends to develop our first patented technology. I wasn't just the founder's wife. I was an engineer, with 2 master's degrees and a vision for healthcare technology that had shaped our company's most profitable division. Yet there I sat at 2 p.m., across from my husband of 10 years, while he clinically outlined why my services were no longer required. "The company is moving in a new direction," Joel explained, his blue eyes never quite meeting mine. The gold wedding band on his left hand caught the light as he gestured. "The board feels your division has become too cautious, too focused on refinement rather than innovation." Cherry stood slightly behind him, tablet in hand, the picture of professional detachment. Only the faintest smile at the corner of her mouth betrayed her satisfaction. "The severance package is generous," she interjected, sliding another document forward. 3 months' salary, extended benefits, and of course your basic stock options remain intact. Basic stock options, not my executive options, which would be forfeited upon termination. I understood the distinction immediately. "Who will be taking over product development?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Joel cleared his throat. "We're promoting Melissa from within. She has some exciting ideas for the division's future." Melissa Wells. My deputy for 2 years, talented but impulsive, and apparently more aligned with the company's new direction than its actual architect. See? I signed the termination agreement without reading it fully, a calculated move that would prove advantageous later. "Will that be all?" Joel seemed thrown by my composure. He'd expected tears, perhaps, or anger. Cherry's triumphant expression faltered slightly. "Security will escort you to clear out your office," she said, pressing the intercom to summon them. I stood, smoothing my charcoal skirt. "That won't be necessary. I know my way around after 15 years. As I gathered my few personal belongings, under the awkward gaze of my team, most avoided eye contact. Some looked genuinely distressed. Florian, my lead engineer, approached under the pretense of helping with my box. "This isn't right," she whispered. "The healthcare project is weeks ahead of schedule. Your leadership metrics are the best in the company." I gave her a small smile. "Sometimes business decisions aren't about metrics, Florian." As I walked through the open office toward the elevator, I felt the stares of colleagues who had just witnessed the unceremonious fall of a founding executive. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic click of my heels on the polished concrete floor. The security guard, Mark, who had watched my back on countless late nights, gave me a respectful nod as I approached the exit. His deliberately slow processing of my badge return gave me a moment to compose myself before stepping out into the Seattle rain. I drove home methodically, following each traffic rule with precision, as if the external order could compensate for my internal chaos. In my 17 years as an engineer and executive, I'd learned that the most catastrophic system failures often create the most innovative solutions, if you approach them correctly. And as I pulled into the driveway of the home Joel and I had shared for a decade, I knew exactly what my next steps would be. This wasn't the end of my story with Danfield Technologies. It was merely the end of the first chapter. The next morning, as I sipped coffee from my favorite Northwestern University mug, a reminder of where I'd earned my first engineering degree, my phone lit up with Mark's name. "Mrs. Danfield," he said quietly, as if afraid of being overheard. "Mr. Danfield's father just arrived. He's asking for you. Seems pretty upset." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. William Danfield, the semi-retired founder who had handed the company reins to his son 5 years ago while remaining chairman of the board, my father-in-law and, more importantly, my longtime mentor. Did Joel tell him? I asked. No, ma'am. That's why he's asking for you. There's about to be a storm in the executive suite. I thanked Mark, ended the call, and prepared with deliberate care. The charcoal suit from yesterday was replaced with a deep blue dress and matching blazer, William's favorite color, something Joel would recognize immediately as a strategic choice. 40 minutes later, I walked back into Danfield Technologies. The security desk waved me through despite my deactivated badge, William's authorization overriding yesterday's dismissal. The executive floor was eerily quiet when I stepped off the elevator, the administrative staff studiously focused on their screens, avoiding eye contact. I could hear William's voice before I rounded the corner to Joel's office, a controlled thunder that reminded me why Danfield Technologies had thrived under his leadership for 2 decades. You did what? I paused, allowing the confrontation to unfold without my presence. Dad, this was a board-approved restructuring. Joel's voice lacked its usual confidence. Amy's division has been underperforming against projections. That's objectively false. William's retort was immediate. I read the quarterly reports. Product development is the only division exceeding its targets. Cherry's voice interjected, smooth and placating. Mr. Danfield, if I could just share the analysis we prepared for the board. And you are? William's tone dropped 10 degrees. Cherry Winters, executive assistant to the CEO. Since when does an executive assistant present financial analysis to my board? The silence that followed was deafening. I chose that moment to enter, knocking softly on the open door. William turned, relief washing over his weathered face. At 72, he remained imposing, tall and straight-backed, with the same piercing blue eyes he'd passed to Joel. Amy. He crossed the room, embracing me. What the hell is going on? Joel stood behind his desk, face pale. Cherry remained perfectly poised, though her knuckles were white around her tablet. Perhaps you should ask your son about the company's new direction, I said evenly, and his creative approach to both corporate and marital restructuring. William's eyes narrowed as he looked between us. He'd built his fortune on reading people, and the tableau before him told a story even without words. Joel. His voice was dangerously quiet. Is there something beyond business decisions happening here? Joel straightened, attempting to reclaim his executive presence. Dad, this is a complex situation. It's actually quite simple, I interrupted, placing my handbag on the conference table. Joel and Ms. Winters have been having an affair for several months. Concurrently, they've been systematically isolating me professionally, excluding me from strategic meetings, and building a case for my termination with selective data presented to board members, specifically Tobias and Lucien. Cherry flinched slightly at the precision of my assessment. Joel's expression hardened into the cold mask I'd grown familiar with over recent months. That's a creative interpretation of events, he said dismissively. Cherry and I have been working closely on the European expansion. Any personal accusations are just attempts to distract from the performance issues in your division. William remained silent, his gaze moving between the 3 of us. Behind his eyes, I could see calculations happening. He wasn't just processing a family drama, but evaluating a business crisis. Show me the board presentation, he finally said. Cherry hesitated, glancing at Joel, who nodded tersely. She pulled up documents on the wall screen, walking through slides that painted a damning picture of product development delays, excessive caution in regulatory approaches, and innovation metrics that lagged behind competitors. It was masterfully constructed misinformation. Isolated data points presented without context, timelines manipulated to exclude external factors, and benchmarks selected to create unfavorable comparisons. I waited until she finished before speaking. May I? I gestured to the screen controls. William nodded. Joel began to object, but fell silent under his father's glare. These numbers are accurate but fundamentally misrepresented, I explained, pulling up the complete data set from my cloud drive. Our caution in regulatory processes has resulted in 0 delays in FDA approvals, while our 3 main competitors have experienced setbacks averaging 7 months. I moved through each point methodically, revealing the fuller context Cherry's presentation had deliberately omitted. The innovation metrics had excluded our pending patents, 11 in total. The development timelines failed to account for the strategic pause we'd implemented to align with new international standards, a move that would save millions in compliance costs later. Most critically, I concluded, the healthcare monitoring system, the project Ms. Winters' presentation dismisses as stagnant, received preliminary FDA approval yesterday morning. The notification would have been in my email, which I presume was deactivated immediately after my termination. William's expression had transformed from concern to cold fury. Joel, call an emergency board meeting, now. Dad, you're overreacting, now. The single word carried the weight of decades of authority. Joel reached for his phone, stepping away to make the call. Cherry remained perfectly still, her professional mask finally showing cracks as she realized the precariousness of her position. William turned to me. Amy, I had no knowledge of any of this. The board meeting I attended last month presented very different information. I believe you, I said quietly. Joel has been selectively communicating with board members. Tobias and Lucian received different briefings than you and the others. William nodded grimly. Divide and conquer, a tactic I taught him ironically. Joel returned, his expression now carefully neutral. The board can convene via video conference in 30 minutes. Good, William said. Cherry, you're excused. Sir, as Mr. Danfield's executive assistant, you're excused, William repeated, his tone brooking no argument. After she left, closing the door quietly behind her, William turned to his son. Before the board call, tell me the truth. All of it. Joel hesitated, looking between us, calculating his best approach. I recognized his expression, the same one he wore when cornered in business negotiations. My personal life is separate from business decisions, he finally said. Amy's division has been moving too slowly for current market conditions. The board agreed changes were needed. Which board members agreed? William asked. Joel's hesitation was brief but telling. Tobias and Lucian were most supportive. 2 out of 7, William noted. Not a majority. They're the most involved in day-to-day operations. They're your college friends with the least business experience, William corrected. And you've been keeping information from the rest of us. The intercom buzzed. The board is assembled on the conference line, Cherry's voice announced. William straightened his tie, a habit from decades of executive leadership. After this meeting, the 3 of us will discuss the personal aspects of this situation. Now let's focus on the business breach of trust. As Joel connected the call, I caught a glimpse of genuine fear in his eyes. For the first time since founding the company, his position was truly at risk. And we both knew it. The boardroom screen displayed 7 faces, the full Danfield Technologies Board of Directors. William sat at the head of the conference table, Joel to his right, and I was directed to sit at William's left, a positioning that wasn't lost on anyone present. I've called this emergency meeting, William began, because information has come to my attention suggesting the board has been deliberately misled regarding recent executive decisions. Tobias leaned forward, his carefully groomed beard framing a concerned frown. That's a serious accusation, William. It is, William agreed, which is why I've brought receipts. He nodded to me. I connected my tablet to the presentation system, methodically displaying the contradictions between what Joel had presented to Tobias and Lucian versus what the full board had seen. The selective metrics, the manipulated timelines, the conveniently omitted context that transformed success stories into apparent failures. Most significantly, I concluded, the termination of the VP of Product Development was executed without proper board approval, based on a misrepresentation of division performance and in violation of company bylaws regarding executive dismissals. Is this true, Joel? Asked Dr. Gretchen Winters, the board's most senior independent director, a distinguished biotech researcher whose presence had given our healthcare initiatives crucial credibility. Joel shifted in his chair. The operational changes were within my authority as CEO. I consulted with board members most familiar with our market challenges. You consulted selectively, William corrected, with your 2 closest friends on the board. Lucian's face reddened. We acted in the company's best interest based on the information provided. Information that was deliberately incomplete, I interjected, displaying side by side the presentations Joel had given to different board members. The room fell silent. As the evidence mounted, then William reached into his briefcase and withdrew a worn leather portfolio, placing it on the table with deliberate care. There's something else the board should know, he said, his voice suddenly quieter. Something I've kept private at Amy's request for the past 15 years. Joel looked at the portfolio, then at his father with confusion. I recognized it immediately. The original investment agreement, with its distinctive leather binding that Melissa, my college roommate, and now a senior partner at Blackwood Legal, had insisted on using for documents of historical significance. When Joel first approached me with the idea for Danfield Technologies, William continued, I was skeptical. The medical device market was crowded, regulatory approval processes were lengthy, and initial capital requirements were substantial. He opened the portfolio, removing a document with signatures still clearly visible after 15 years. I agreed to provide the office space and my industry connections, but I wasn't willing to risk significant capital on an unproven concept. The initial funding, $1.7 million in seed capital, came from another source. Joel's confusion deepened. You took out a personal loan. You told me. I told you what you needed to hear at the time, William interrupted. You were 26, brilliant but arrogant, and I didn't think you were ready to know the truth. William slid the document toward the center of the table where the camera could capture it for the remote board members. The initial capital investment for Danfield Technologies, the money that funded our first 3 years of operations, our initial patent applications, and our prototype development, came from Amy. The boardroom fell silent. On screen, the directors leaned closer to their cameras, attempting to read the document. That's impossible, Joel finally said. Amy didn't have that kind of money when we met. I didn't when we met, I confirmed, speaking directly to the board rather than to Joel. But 2 months before Joel approached William with his business plan, my grandfather passed away. He left me his entire estate, the proceeds from selling his semiconductor components company to a major tech firm. Joel stared at me. Disbelief etched across his face. You never told me. I did, I corrected him. On our 3rd date, I mentioned inheriting money from my grandfather. You were so focused on pitching your business idea that you nodded and continued talking about adaptive healthcare interfaces. William picked up the thread. When Joel couldn't secure outside investment, I approached Amy privately. She had the technical background to evaluate the business plan properly and the capital to make it viable. But why keep it secret? Tobias asked, his earlier defensiveness now replaced with confusion. I met his gaze through the screen. William, and I agreed it would be better for the company culture and for Joel's leadership development if employees saw him as the visionary founder rather than someone who married into his financing. The original agreement, William continued, pointing to specific clauses in the document, granted Amy 51% ownership of Danfield Technologies, with her shares held in a blind trust administered by Blackwood Legal. I retained 30%, and Joel received 19% for his intellectual property contributions. "That's not reflected in our current shareholder documentation," said Marion Reeves, the board's financial expert, her brow furrowed. "It wouldn't be," William acknowledged. "When we took the company public 7 years ago, we restructured the ownership through a complex series of transactions. But the original agreement contained provisions that would be automatically triggered under specific circumstances." He turned another page in the contract, pointing to a paragraph marked with a red tab. Section 7.3 states that in the event of wrongful termination of any founding member, the company ownership reverts to the original distribution, with an additional 10% penalty transferred from the terminating party to the terminated party. Joel's face drained of color as the implications became clear. "As of yesterday at 2:17 p.m., William continued, when Joel terminated Amy without proper cause or board approval, the ownership structure of Danfield Technologies legally reverted to 61% Amy, 30% William Danfield, and 9% Joel Danfield. The silence that followed was absolute. On screen, the board members exchanged glances, processing the seismic shift in company control that had just been revealed. Joel finally broke the silence. "This can't be legally binding. It's been 15 years. "It is binding," interrupted Catherine Wu, the board's legal counsel, who had been reviewing the document text visible on her screen. "I recognize Melissa Blackwood's work. If she structured this agreement, it will be ironclad, particularly if the blind trust has remained continuously active, which I suspect it has." "It has," I confirmed. "The quarterly reports have been filed without interruption for 15 years. Joel turned to me, his expression shifting from shock to a calculated calm that I recognized all too well. "Amy, we should discuss this privately. There must be a reasonable solution that doesn't involve disrupting the entire company." "I agree completely," I replied, my voice steady. "Stability is my primary concern, which is why I've prepared a transition proposal for the board's consideration." As I withdrew my own folder from my bag, I caught William's slight smile. He had always appreciated strategic preparation, a value he'd instilled in me during our years of quiet mentorship. Joel wasn't just facing the end of his marriage, he was confronting the end of his unrestricted authority over the company he thought he owned. And from the calculations visibly running behind his eyes, he was finally beginning to understand just how thoroughly he had underestimated his wife. The board meeting adjourned after 2 hours of intense discussion. Joel had retreated to his office, Cherry was nowhere to be seen, and I found myself alone with William in the small executive lounge overlooking the Seattle skyline, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've had that transition plan, ready for some time," William observed, not a question but an acknowledgement. I nodded, watching droplets race down the glass. "Since I overheard them 3 weeks ago." "Always prepared," he said with a sad smile. "I wish my son had inherited that quality." The rain intensified, mirroring the storm we'd just weathered in the boardroom. My mind drifted back 15 years to another rainy day, the one that had set this entire journey in motion. I was 25, fresh from completing my second master's degree in biomedical engineering, grieving my grandfather's unexpected death while simultaneously trying to manage the substantial inheritance he'd left me. Harold Emerson had built Emerson Precision Components from nothing, turning his garage workshop into a respected supplier for medical device manufacturers. "You have your grandfather's mind for innovation and your grandmother's head for business," he'd told me during our last lunch together. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." 2 weeks after his funeral, I attended the Seattle Medical Innovation Conference, seeking direction. The inheritance, nearly $2 million after taxes, felt like both opportunity and burden. My grandfather had expected me to do something meaningful with it. Joel Danfield stood out immediately among the presenters. Tall, confident, with striking, blue eyes and boundless enthusiasm about adaptive healthcare interfaces that could revolutionize patient monitoring. His technical presentation was flawed but visionary, someone who could see the destination clearly but hadn't quite mapped the journey. I approached him afterward with questions, pointing out the technical challenges his proposal hadn't addressed. Rather than becoming defensive, he'd listened intently, asked insightful follow-up questions, and finally invited me to continue the discussion over coffee. One coffee became dinner. Dinner became regular meetings where we sketched possibilities on napkins and notebook pages. Joel had the market vision and entrepreneurial drive. I had the technical expertise to refine his concepts into workable systems. My father thinks I'm being too ambitious, he confided one evening. 3 months into our professional collaboration and budding romance. He's offered office space in his building but won't commit significant capital. Says the medical device market is too risky for a startup without substantial backing. We were in my apartment, surrounded by technical papers and takeout containers. It was the first time I'd seen Joel's confidence falter. "How much would you need to get started?" I asked. Realistically, for the first 3 years. The number he quoted, 1.7 million, represented almost the entirety of my inheritance. It was reckless, perhaps, but I believed in the technology. More dangerously, I was beginning to believe in him. "I might know an investor," I said carefully. Joel looked up eagerly. "Who?" I hesitated, uncertain whether to reveal the truth. We were still getting to know each other, still navigating the complex intersection of personal and professional. "Let me make some calls," I deflected. The next day, I contacted Melissa, my former roommate who had just joined Blackwood Legal's business division. She listened to my plan with increasing alarm. "You want to invest your entire inheritance in your new boyfriend's startup?" she summarized bluntly. "In a medical technology company with significant potential," I corrected. "It happens to be Joel's concept, but the technical implementation would be largely mine." Melissa sighed deeply. "If you're determined to do this, at least let me structure it properly. Full investment protection, board representation, anti-dilution provisions, and specific performance clauses." She insisted on one provision that seemed excessive at the time. If any founder is terminated without cause, ownership reverts to original percentages plus a 10% penalty from the terminating party. "That seems unnecessarily punitive," I'd objected. Melissa fixed me with her stern lawyer gaze. "Amy, I've seen too many founders pushed out of their own companies once they've served their purpose. You're not just dating this guy. You're entrusting him with your future. We need to ensure you're protected." Agreed, but requested an unusual modification. "I want my investment held through a blind trust. Joel shouldn't know it's coming from me." Her eyebrows shot up. "Why?" "He needs to prove himself as a leader," I explained. "If everyone knows his girlfriend financed the company, it undermines his authority. And if our relationship doesn't work out—" "Fair point," she conceded. "I'll structure it so your identity as the principal investor is known only to the trust administrators and whoever else you designate." I designated only William Danfield, whom I approached privately before presenting the final proposal to Joel. William was skeptical at first, both of my investment and my request for anonymity. "You're taking an enormous risk," he warned, "financially and personally." "I believe in the technology," I told him. "And I think Joel has the potential to be an exceptional leader with proper guidance." William studied me thoughtfully. He's impulsive, brilliant, but impatient. He sees the destination, but sometimes barrels through obstacles rather than navigating around them. "That's why he needs experienced mentorship," I suggested, "and perhaps someone to quietly address the technical challenges while he focuses on business development and market strategy." A slow smile spread across William's face. "You've thought this through. Joel told me you were exceptional, but I'm beginning to think he doesn't fully appreciate just how much." The investment was structured, the papers signed, and Danfield Technologies was born. Joel was told only that his father had found an angel investor who wished to remain anonymous, but had faith in the concept. His relief and excitement were palpable. "We're really doing this," he said, lifting me off my feet and spinning me around when I met him after the final signatures. "My father actually found someone who believes in us." I smiled, letting him believe the simplified version of events. Us felt right, in multiple ways. 6 months later, we were married. 7 months after that, our first product received FDA approval. The company grew steadily, expanding from our initial team of 5 to over 50 employees by year 3. Joel grew as a leader, though William and I both noticed his tendency to take credit for innovations that came from his team. "He needs to learn to elevate others," William commented during one of our private mentoring sessions, meetings Joel assumed were simply father-in-law and daughter-in-law bonding time. "He's still maturing as a leader," I defended. "Though I'd noticed the same pattern." "Perhaps," William said thoughtfully. "But sometimes people reveal their character when they think no one important is watching." As I gazed out at the rain-washed Seattle skyline 15 years later, William's words echoed with painful clarity. Joel had indeed revealed his character, not just in his affair with Cherry, but in how quickly he'd discarded the wife who had made his success possible. "What will you do now?" William asked, breaking my reverie. I turned from the window, my reflection resolute in the glass. "Exactly what I outlined in the transition plan. The company needs stability, not revenge." William nodded approvingly. "And Joel?" "That," I said quietly, "is a separate matter entirely." Everything changed 8 months ago. The quarterly board meeting had just concluded successfully. Our healthcare monitoring system had entered final stage clinical trials. The European expansion was proceeding on schedule, and our stock had reached an all-time high. Joel and I hosted a small celebration at our lakeside home, inviting the executive team and board members to mark the company's continued success. William was the last to leave, lingering on our deck overlooking Lake Washington as the sunset painted the water copper in gold. 15 years, he mused, swirling the remains of his scotch. "Remember when we were working out of 2 rooms in my building? Joel selling the vision while you stayed up all night fixing the technical specifications?" I smiled, remembering those early days of adrenaline and possibility. "We've come a long way." "Indeed." William's expression grew serious. "Which is why I've made a decision." Something in his tone made me set down my wine glass. "What kind of decision?" "It's time for me to step back from active board participation, not resign entirely, but reduce my involvement to quarterly oversight." "William," he raised a hand. "I'm 72, Amy. Margaret and I want to travel while we still can. The company is stable, profitable, and in good hands." He looked toward the house where Joel was saying goodbye to the last guests. "It's time for the next generation to fully take the reins." I understood his reasoning, but something about the timing felt wrong. "Have you told Joel?" "Not yet. I wanted your perspective first." William always had a gift for seeing beneath the surface. "You've been concerned about something lately, I can tell." I hesitated. My worries were still formless, subtle shifts in Joel's behavior, small decisions that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability, a growing impatience with regulatory caution, nothing concrete enough to justify alarm. "It's probably nothing," I said finally. "The usual stresses of growth." William studied me carefully. "Remember what I taught you about inflection points in business. They're rarely dramatic explosions, usually just quiet moments where paths diverge." 2 days later, William collapsed during his morning jog. The diagnosis came swiftly, a mild heart attack, not life-threatening, but serious enough to demand lifestyle changes and a reduction in stress. Joel was genuinely shaken. William had always seemed invincible, the patriarch whose approval Joel still sought despite his own success. My husband spent hours at the hospital, reassuring his father that the company would be fine, that he should focus on recovery. Dad's stepping back completely, Joel informed me as we drove home from the hospital. Doctor's orders. No board duties, no consulting, nothing business-related for at least 6 months. I glanced at him, surprised by the note of opportunity beneath his concern. That seems extreme for a mild heart attack. Joel shrugged. Doctor thinks the board responsibilities are particularly stressful for him, all those performance metrics and quarterly expectations. He tapped the steering wheel, thoughtfully. It's for the best. Dad needs to relax. And honestly, the board could use some new perspectives. That conversation marked the beginning of subtle but significant changes at Danfield Technologies. Within weeks, Joel had nominated Tobias and Lucienne for expanded board roles, creating an executive committee that could make decisions without full board approval for the sake of operational efficiency. The remaining board members, concerned about William and trusting of Joel, approved the measure with minimal discussion. Cherry Winters was hired shortly after. Her arrival coincided with the restructuring of the executive support team, a seemingly routine organizational shift that resulted in my own assistant being reassigned and communication increasingly filtered through Cherry. She's streamlining our executive processes, Joel explained when I questioned the changes. We've gotten too bureaucratic as we've grown. Initially, I saw no reason for concern. Cherry was undeniably efficient, and Joel seemed energized by the organizational refresh. Our marriage, which had settled into comfortable familiarity after 15 years, even experienced a brief renewal as Joel's enthusiasm spilled over into our personal life. But within 3 months, the pattern became clear. Executive meetings were rescheduled when I was traveling for the European expansion. Decision. Documents arrived for my signature with abbreviated review periods. Financial reports for my division contained subtle discrepancies that required time-consuming verification. I think Joel's assistant is deliberately making my job more difficult, I confided to Florian, my lead engineer, after discovering a critical test report had been misplaced before a regulatory submission. Florian looked uncomfortable. There are rumors, she admitted reluctantly. What kind of rumors? About Joel and Ms. Winters. People have noticed late meetings, business trips scheduled simultaneously. She hesitated. And the way she looks at him in meetings isn't exactly professional. I'd dismissed the rumors, not because I didn't believe them possible, but because my focus remained on the healthcare monitoring system, our most promising product in years, one that could help millions of patients with chronic conditions. The technical challenges and regulatory hurdles demanded my full attention. That singular focus became my blind spot. By the time I overheard Joel and Cherry in the conference room 3 weeks ago, the groundwork for my removal had been methodically laid for months. My isolation within the company had been so gradual that I'd adapted to each change without recognizing the pattern. It started with my father's heart attack, I explained to William as we sat in the executive lounge. That gave Joel the opportunity to restructure the board. William nodded grimly. I suspected something was happening, but Margaret insisted I maintain distance for my recovery. My doctor was quite adamant about stress reduction. His eyes narrowed. Though I now wonder if my doctor received some coaching about my condition's severity. The thought hadn't occurred to me. You think Joel influenced your medical advice? Joel plays golf with Dr. Richardson monthly. I'm not suggesting anything explicit, but emphasizing concerns about my cardiac stress levels would have been simple. Enough? William sighed heavily. I gave him too much leeway, trusted him to honor what we built. I stared out at the rain, thinking about the systematic way Joel and Cherry had constructed their narrative. The manipulated performance metrics, the strategic isolation, the carefully curated board communications. It wasn't impulsive, I realized aloud. Joel didn't just succumb to an attraction to his assistant. This was calculated, They were building toward something. William's expression darkened. The European acquisition. North Star Medical approached us 3 months ago about a potential merger. I advised Joel to proceed cautiously, ensure our intellectual property was properly valued. The pieces clicked into place. If they undervalued my division's contributions and removed me before the acquisition, the post-merger compensation and equity distribution would look very different, William finished, particularly for the CEO who orchestrated such a successful transition. The betrayal cut deeper with this understanding. Not just my husband's infidelity or my professional undermining, but the calculated dismantling of everything we'd built together for personal gain. The board needs to know about North Star, I said. William nodded, already reaching for his phone. I'll call an executive session for tomorrow morning, without Joel present. As William made the call, I felt an unexpected calm settling over me. The chaos of the past 24 hours was resolving into clarity and purpose. Joel and Cherry hadn't just made a personal and professional mistake. They had attempted to hijack a company's future for their own benefit, and I was now in position to stop them. The executive boardroom felt different the next morning. Tension hung in the air as board members arrived for the emergency session William had called, without Joel. Cherry had attempted to attend as the official record keeper, but Dr. Gretchen Winters had politely but firmly informed her that only board members would be admitted. This is highly irregular, Tobias protested as William explained Joel's absence. The CEO should be present for all board functions. Not when the CEO's actions are the subject of investigation, William countered. Now, if you'll direct your attention to the materials Amy has prepared. I distributed folders containing comprehensive documentation of my division's actual performance metrics, patent applications, and most importantly, a detailed analysis of how our healthcare monitoring system would impact any potential merger valuation. As you can see, I began, the discrepancies between what was presented to this board and the actual state of product development aren't minor statistical variations. They represent a deliberate pattern of misrepresentation. For the next hour, I walked the board through the technical achievements that had been minimized or hidden in Joel's presentations. The proprietary algorithms that reduced false positives by 78% compared to market competitors. The battery efficiency innovations that extended device life from 18 hours to 72 hours. The machine learning integration that allowed predictive alerting for certain conditions. These innovations aren't just incremental improvements, I explained. They represent categorical advances that position us uniquely in the market, particularly for any acquisition valuation. Marion Reeves, the financial expert, leaned forward. Are you suggesting Joel deliberately undervalued these innovations in preparation for the North Star discussions? The evidence suggests exactly that, William confirmed, sliding forward another document. Internal communications between Joel and North Star's CEO that hadn't been shared with the full board. The room fell silent as board members reviewed the materials. Tobias and Lucian exchanged uncomfortable glances, their earlier defensiveness faltering against the weight of documentation. Dr. Winters removed her glasses, fixing me with a penetrating stare. Amy, how long have you been tracking these discrepancies? I became aware of systematic issues approximately 3 weeks ago, I admitted. But the full pattern only became clear after my termination, when I had time to analyze the cumulative data without daily operational distractions. What's remarkable, William added, is that Amy was able to accomplish all of this technical innovation while being increasingly isolated from company resources. I hadn't planned to share the next part, but William's comment opened the door. I connected my personal tablet to the display system, entering a secure password. What I'm about to show you has never been shared with the executive team, I began. 3 years ago, I became concerned about our vulnerability to both competitive intelligence and potential internal documentation manipulation. The screen displayed a secure development environment, a parallel system where I had maintained independent records of all product development activities, secured behind encryption that even our IT department couldn't access. I created a shadow documentation system, I explained, mirroring all official records but secured independently. Every test result, every regulatory submission, every patent application, all verified and preserved with blockchain authentication to prevent tampering. Tobias stared at the screen in disbelief. You've been running a parallel system for 3 years? Without authorization? Without Joel's knowledge, I corrected. The system was implemented using my executive discretionary budget, fully documented, in quarterly financial reports, though the specific purpose was classified under enhanced security protocols. William couldn't suppress a small smile. A distinction Joel clearly missed in the financial reviews he claimed to conduct so thoroughly. I navigated through the system, showing how it had captured every attempt to access, modify, or duplicate our proprietary information, including unauthorized access attempts from Cherry Winter's credentials to restricted product development servers. On 7 occasions in the past 3 months, I noted, displaying the access logs, someone using Ms. Winter's login attempted to access confidential test data for our healthcare monitoring system. Each attempt was flagged by my security protocol and fed false information while preserving the authentic data securely. Dr. Winters leaned back, visibly impressed. So while Joel thought he was presenting manipulated data to us, he was actually presenting manipulated versions of already falsified data, I finished. The authentic performance metrics remained, secure and verifiable. The revelation transformed the atmosphere in the room. Board members who had initially seemed skeptical now looked at me with new appreciation, and no small amount of concern about what other capabilities I might have kept hidden. There's more, I continued, bringing up a different screen. 4 months ago, when Joel began excluding me from the European expansion discussions, I initiated my own independent research into potential acquisition targets and competitors. The display showed a comprehensive analysis of the European medical device market, including detailed profiles of key players, particularly Northstar Medical. Northstar has been pursuing an acquisition strategy focused on proprietary patient monitoring technology, I explained. They've approached 3 other companies in the past 2 years with similar profiles to ours. In each case, they identified and removed key technical leadership before finalizing terms. Marion's eyes widened as she examined the pattern. They systematically undervalue the technical innovations by removing the people who understand their true market potential. Precisely, I confirmed. And in each case, they had inside assistance, usually from ambitious executives who received substantial compensation packages in the post-acquisition organization. The implication hung in the air, unmistakable. Joel hadn't just betrayed me. Personally, he'd been manipulated into potentially undervaluing the company's crown jewels for his own gain. The question, William said quietly, is how Joel became vulnerable to this approach. I hesitated, uncomfortable with the personal aspect of the situation, despite everything that had transpired. I believe Cherry Winters was hired specifically to facilitate this strategy. Her previous employment history includes 2 companies that were acquired under similar circumstances. Displaying another document, I showed Cherry's complete employment history, more extensive than what had appeared in her official Danfield resume. She had worked briefly for both companies Northstar had previously acquired, departing shortly after each acquisition. You've been investigating all of this while still running your division? Lucien asked, the first time he'd spoken during the presentation. I sleep 4 hours a night, I replied simply. A habit from our startup days that I never abandoned. William nodded confirmation. During the first 3 years of the company, Amy maintained her technical development schedule while simultaneously managing quality control and regulatory compliance. Joel was the public face, but Amy was the operational engine, which Joel wanted to remove before Northstar could recognize its true value, Dr. Winters concluded. Yes, I agreed. But he made one critical miscalculation. Besides underestimating. You? Marion asked with raised eyebrows. I allowed myself a small smile. He forgot who wrote the original security protocols for our intellectual property, and who still maintained the master encryption keys. As the board absorbed the full implications of Joel's actions and my hidden capabilities, I could see their perspective shifting. I wasn't just the wronged wife or the unjustly terminated executive. I was perhaps the only person who fully understood both the value and vulnerabilities of what we'd built. So, William said, turning to the full board, given this information, I believe we need to reconsider not just Joel's actions, but the company's leadership structure moving forward. The board members exchanged glances, a tacit agreement forming before anyone spoke. The company's future hung in the balance, and it was clear whose hands they now wanted holding it. After the board session adjourned with a vote to suspend Joel pending a full investigation, William and I found ourselves back in the executive lounge. The immediate crisis had been addressed, but understanding the full extent of Joel and Cherry's actions required deeper examination. I'd like to see exactly how they implemented these changes, William said, his expression troubled. How my son went from the leader we groomed to this. I nodded, connecting my tablet to the lounge's display. I've been reconstructing the timeline. The transformation was gradual, but deliberate. The first changes had begun subtly, almost imperceptibly, within weeks of William's heart attack. Meeting agendas shifted, prioritizing European expansion discussions while relegating product development updates to brief end-of-meeting summaries. Joel introduced a new streamlined reporting structure that routed all executive communications through his office, ostensibly to protect William from stress during his recovery. Classic information control tactic, William observed. I never authorized that communication protocol. The reorganization accelerated after Cherry's arrival. Within her first month, she had audited all administrative processes and implemented new documentation standards that, in hindsight, clearly created bottlenecks for my division while expediting Joel's priorities. Look at the resource allocation. Shifts, I said, displaying a chart tracking departmental budget adjustments over the previous 6 months. The pattern was unmistakable. Systematic reductions to product development's research budget, initially small enough to appear as normal operational adjustments. Corresponding increases to market expansion and executive operations, the latter a new cost center Cherry had, created that reported directly to Joel. She established a shadow executive team, I explained, showing the organizational chart changes. These 6 new positions, all reporting to executive operations rather than their functional departments. William leaned closer, examining the names. I don't recognize any of these people. That's because they're all recent hires with connections to Cherry. This one, I pointed to a market strategy director, is her former colleague from North Star's previous acquisition. This one is her business school classmate. This one appears to be her cousin, based on social media connections my security system flagged. I brought up another document, a comprehensive audit of company expenditures since Cherry's arrival. The data revealed a disturbing pattern. Significant increases in business development travel, always with Joel and Cherry attending together. Expensive client dinners with minimal documentation of attendees. A new executive retreat property, leased in the San Juan Islands, used only twice, both times by Joel and Cherry for strategic planning sessions. They were systematically diverting company resources while building their power base, I explained. Meanwhile, watch what happened to our core innovation teams. The next slide showed staffing changes in product development. Experienced engineers, reassigned to special projects that never materialized. Key team leaders replaced with less experienced personnel recommended by Cherry. Critical quality control positions left unfilled after resignations, positions that required Joel's approval to restore. Florian was the only senior technical leader who remained, I noted. And only because she threatened legal action when they tried to relocate her to our Minneapolis office. William shook his head in disbelief. The board never approved these organizational changes. They were executed through a series of seemingly unrelated tactical decisions, never presented comprehensively, I explained. Classic salami tactics, thin slices that don't look significant in isolation. The most disturbing evidence came from the product roadmap changes. Joel and Cherry had gradually shifted development priorities away from the healthcare monitoring system toward flashier but less substantive features that would appeal to Northstar's consumer-focused strategy. They were repositioning our entire product strategy to align with Northstar's interests, I said, while deliberately undermining the innovations that would have given us leverage in acquisition negotiations. I displayed communications between Cherry and Melissa Wells, my former deputy who had been promoted to replace me. The messages revealed Cherry's careful coaching on which projects to emphasize and which to downplay in board presentations. Melissa was being manipulated, I noted. Cherry positioned everything as helping her succeed, while actually setting her up to devalue our most important work. William's expression darkened as he reviewed a financial impact assessment I'd prepared. These changes would have reduced our acquisition valuation by at least 30%, while significantly increasing Joel's post-merger role and compensation, I added, showing the draft term sheet that had been buried in Cherry's encrypted files, which my security system had quietly archived. The document outlined a post-acquisition structure that eliminated most of Danfield's executive leadership, but created an expanded role for Joel as Northstar's Chief Innovation Officer, with a compensation package nearly triple his current one. Cherry would have become Senior VP of Integration, I noted, pointing to the relevant section, a newly created position reporting directly to Joel, with significant equity incentives. The picture was now complete. A systematic dismantling of the company's true value centers, consolidation of power under Joel and Cherry, and preparation for a severely undervalued acquisition that would nevertheless reward them handsomely. The damage to the company would have been incalculable, William said quietly. Not just financial, but to our entire innovation culture. I nodded, pulling up staff satisfaction surveys that showed morale in steep decline across all departments except executive operations. Employee turnover had increased 34% in the past 6 months, with exit interviews citing changing company values and leadership concerns as primary reasons. The most valuable members of my team were already updating their resumes, I said. Florian told me this morning that they had a suicide pact. If I didn't return within 30 days, the entire core development team planned to resign simultaneously. And what about the actual products? William asked. Beyond the valuation impact, how did these changes affect what we deliver to patients? This was the part that troubled me most deeply. I displayed the quality metrics for our most recent product updates. While still meeting minimum regulatory requirements, the testing protocols had been abbreviated, the performance standards lowered, and the user experience compromised for faster release cycles. Joel and Cherry were trading our long-term reputation for short-term market perception, I explained. Our latest release has a 23% higher rate of non-critical errors than any previous version. They're still within acceptable regulatory parameters, but nowhere near our historical standards. William stared at the data in silence, grief and anger warring in his expression. Finally, he looked up at me, his decision evident before he spoke. We need to do more than just remove Joel from leadership, he said firmly. We need to systematically undo every change they've implemented. I nodded, already pulling up my transition plan. I've mapped out each decision point and its remedy. If the board approves my appointment, we can begin implementing corrections immediately. What I didn't say, what I couldn't yet bring myself to fully address, was how completely Joel had betrayed not just the company, but but our marriage and the vision we'd built together. The professional damage could be repaired with diligent effort. The personal devastation would take far longer to process. As if reading my thoughts, William placed a hand on my shoulder. One step at a time, Amy. First, we save the company. Then you'll have space to decide what comes next for you personally. I nodded gratefully, turning back to the transition plan. The board would reconvene in an hour to vote on Joel's permanent removal and my appointment as interim CEO. There would be time for personal reflection later. For now, Danfield Technologies needed the leader it should have had all along. The boardroom door swung open with a bang as Joel strode in, Cherry half a step behind him. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, tie askew, hair uncombed, a day's stubble shadowing his jaw. The suspension notice had reached him at North Star's Seattle offices, where he'd been conducting preliminary discussions, without board authorization. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, scanning the room. His eyes locked on me, sitting in his customary position at William's right hand. Why wasn't I informed about this meeting? William remained calm, his voice steady. This is the second session of our emergency board meeting, the one addressing your misconduct. Please take a seat, Joel. You too, Ms. Winters, as you're directly implicated in these matters. Cherry hesitated, her practiced poise faltering under the collective gaze of the board. She no longer carried her ever-present tablet, and without it, she seemed diminished somehow. I don't recognize the board's authority to suspend me, Joel declared, remaining standing. These actions are procedurally invalid without the CEO's participation. Actually, Marion Reeves interjected, tapping the company bylaws open before Section 4.7 explicitly grants the board authority to suspend any officer, including the CEO, pending investigation of potential misconduct. No CEO participation required. Joel's confidence wavered momentarily before he regrouped. Then, I demand to know what alleged misconduct justifies this extraordinary measure. Dr. Winters removed her glasses, fixing Joel with the penetrating stare that had intimidated generations of medical researchers. Deliberate misrepresentation of company performance metrics, unauthorized leadership restructuring, undisclosed. Negotiations with North Star Medical, systematic manipulation of product development priorities to facilitate an undervalued acquisition. She paused. Shall I continue? The color drained from Joel's face. He shot an accusatory glance at William. Dad, this is absurd. You can't possibly believe. We've seen the evidence, Joel. William interrupted, his voice laden with disappointment. All of it. The altered presentations, the manipulated performance data, the draft acquisition terms that would have enriched you while devaluing the company by nearly a third. Joel's expression hardened as he turned to me. This is your doing. You couldn't accept being replaced, so you've poisoned the board against me with distortions and out-of-context information. I met his gaze steadily. The evidence speaks for itself. I simply presented the complete data rather than your selectively edited versions. This is a hostile takeover attempt, Cherry interjected, finding her voice at last. Mrs. Danfield is manipulating the situation for personal gain after being legitimately terminated for performance issues. Tobias, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. About that termination, why wasn't the full board consulted as required by the executive removal protocols? Joel waved dismissively. Operational restructuring falls under CEO authority. The board was informed after the fact, as appropriate. The board was selectively informed, corrected Catherine Wu, the legal counsel. Only Tobias and Lucian received the full termination documentation. The rest of us received a vague summary, buried in the monthly organizational update. Cherry's composure slipped further. That was an administrative oversight. It was deliberate obfuscation, William cut in, just like the separate and contradictory performance presentations given to different board members. Joel's strategy shifted, his expression softening as he addressed the full board. Look, I understand there's been some confusion about communication protocols. Perhaps in my enthusiasm for the European expansion, some departmental updates were less comprehensive than they should have been. He spread his hands in a conciliatory gesture. But to suggest some sort of conspiracy is simply preposterous. I remained silent, letting him continue digging his own grave. The North Star discussions are preliminary and exploratory, he continued smoothly. Standard market intelligence gathering, nothing requiring formal board notification at this stage. I tapped a key on my tablet, and the wall screen displayed his calendar from the past month, highlighting 6 meetings with North Star executives, each marked confidential strategy session, with no details recorded in the official company calendar. 5 of these meetings included their acquisition team, I noted. The last included their attorneys. That goes well beyond exploratory discussions. Joel's confident facade cracked. How did you access my private calendar? The CEO's calendar isn't private company property, I responded. And as VP of Product Development, I had authorized access to all executive schedules for project coordination purposes, access you forgot to revoke upon my termination. His eyes narrowed. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting the company, I corrected, just as I did by maintaining secure backups of all the technical documentation and performance data you and Cherry attempted to manipulate. Cherry stepped forward, desperation evident in her voice. The board needs to understand the context here. Danfield's future depends on strategic partnerships. The traditional product development approach was too slow, too cautious for current market conditions. Joel was simply positioning us for maximum competitive advantage. By undermining our core products, by replacing experienced engineers with your personal connections, by diverting company resources to fund your affair. William's voice was quiet but cutting. The word affair hung in the air, the personal betrayal finally explicitly named in the professional setting. Joel's expression darkened. My personal life is irrelevant to this discussion. Not when you used company funds to finance it, Marion responded, sliding a document across the table. 7 executive retreats in 4 months, all attended exclusively by you and Ms. Winters. Luxury accommodations charged to the corporate account. A leased property in the San Juans used only by the 2 of you. Cherry paled. Those were legitimate strategy sessions. With no documented outcomes, no attendee lists, no agenda, and no minutes, Catherine Wu finished. Highly irregular for legitimate business activities. Joel looked around the room, finally recognizing the unified position of the board. His demeanor shifted entirely, calculation replacing indignation. What exactly do you want? He asked, directing the question to William. The board has already voted to suspend you pending a full investigation, William replied. We're reconvening now to vote on appointing an interim CEO. Joel's laugh was brittle. Let me guess, Amy? When no one contradicted him, his expression hardened. This is absurd. She doesn't have the market vision or leadership presence to. She has the technical expertise, ethical foundation, and comprehensive company knowledge that you've increasingly lacked, William interrupted. More importantly, she has the trust of this board. Joel turned to me, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You won't get away with this. I built this company. We built this company, I corrected him, with my investment, my technical innovations, and my 70-hour work weeks. The difference is, I never forgot that. For a moment, something like genuine confusion crossed Joel's face, as if he truly couldn't comprehend how his narrative of sole visionary founder had been so thoroughly dismantled. The board will now vote, William announced. Joel, Cherry, you may remain as observers, but you have no voting privileges at this time. As they reluctantly took seats at the far end of the table, I caught Joel's eye. The man I had married, the passionate innovator I had believed in enough to invest my inheritance and 15 years of my life, was nowhere to be seen in the cold, calculating gaze that met mine. What remained was a stranger who had gambled everything, our company, our marriage, our shared vision, and was only now realizing he had lost. The board secretary called for the vote, and one by one, the members spoke their decisions. Even Tobias and Lucian, after examining the evidence, voted in favor of my appointment. The outcome was unanimous. Effective immediately, William announced, Amy Danfield is appointed interim CEO of Danfield Technologies, with full executive authority. As the words were spoken, Joel's phone chimed with an alert. He glanced down, then looked up at me with sudden comprehension. "You've locked me out of the systems already," he said, not a question, but a realization. I nodded. Security protocols, initiated at the moment of the vote. Standard procedure for executive transitions, a procedure you established, if you recall. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across his face as he understood the completeness of his defeat and the competence of the woman who now controlled the company he had tried to take from her. With the board vote concluded, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Joel and Cherry were escorted to HR to process their suspension paperwork. As the board members gathered their materials preparing to adjourn, Dr. Winters paused. "Before we conclude," she said thoughtfully, "I'd like to better understand something." She turned to me. "Amy, you've documented extensive contributions to this company that most of us were unaware of. Why keep your role so hidden all these years?" The questions silenced the room. Even William looked curious. There were aspects of my history with Danfield Technologies that I'd never fully explained, even to him. I took a measured breath. "It began as a practical decision," I explained. "When I provided the initial funding, Joel was still establishing himself as a leader. We agreed that having his girlfriend, later wife, identified as the primary investor might undermine his authority." "But that was 15 years ago," Marion noted. "Why maintain the secrecy as the company grew?" I glanced at William, who nodded encouragingly. "It evolved from practical to strategic," I continued. "Being underestimated became an unexpected advantage." I connected my tablet to the room's display, bringing up historical documents from the company's early years, engineering schematics, technical specifications, clinical trial designs. Each bore official attribution to various team members, but the metadata I highlighted showed my digital signature as the primary author. "Our first medical monitoring interface," I explained, displaying the original design, officially credited to the engineering team led by Dr. Marcus Bennett. In reality, I developed the core architecture while Marcus provided regulatory guidance. I swiped to another document, the algorithm that still formed the foundation of our diagnostic systems. Attributed to our AI development group. Actually written during a 3-day coding marathon in our spare bedroom when our contracted developers failed to deliver. Document after document revealed my hidden fingerprints across every major innovation in the company's history. Patents, filed under team names that I had actually developed. Research breakthroughs credited to departments I had quietly guided. Regulatory strategies attributed to consultants that I had actually architected. "None of this is documented in your personnel file," Tobias observed, studying the evidence with growing surprise. "Because I deliberately kept it that way," I acknowledged. Early on, I noticed something interesting. When ideas came from Joel's wife, they faced more scrutiny, more resistance. When the same concepts were presented through established technical teams, they were evaluated on merit alone. William nodded slowly. "I noticed you often fed your best ideas through other channels. I assumed it was to avoid any appearance of nepotism." "Partly," I agreed, "but it became more deliberate over time. I discovered I could navigate company politics more effectively when people underestimated my technical knowledge and influence. I brought up meeting minutes from critical junctures in the company's history, product pivots, market strategy shifts, organizational restructures. Each showed my seemingly modest contributions that, in retrospect, had gently but decisively steered the company toward its most successful paths. The healthcare monitoring focus that became our most profitable division, I noted, highlighting a seemingly casual comment I'd made in a strategy meeting 9 years ago. The European expansion, initiative that Joel claimed as his vision, I added, showing an email chain where I had first outlined the approach. The regulatory strategy that gave us an 18-month advantage over competitors. Dr. Winters leaned forward, fascinated. You were the invisible architect all along. Not entirely invisible, I corrected. Just selectively visible. My technical contributions were acknowledged within my division. But at the executive and board level, I allowed Joel to synthesize and present our innovations as collective achievements, or even as his own initiatives. Why? Lucien asked, genuine confusion in his voice. You had the expertise, the investment authority, the technical credibility. Why let Joel take the spotlight? I considered the question carefully. Initially, it was about making our personal and professional relationship work. Joel needed to be seen as the visionary leader, and I was content to focus on the technical challenges I found most fulfilling. I paused, recognizing a deeper truth. But over time, I realized the company actually functioned more effectively with this arrangement. Joel excelled at building market presence, inspiring external confidence, and representing our vision to investors. I was more effective ensuring that vision was technically sound and properly executed. A complementary partnership, William observed. Until it wasn't. Until Joel began believing his own carefully curated mythology, I agreed. The story we created, of his singular genius and vision, gradually became his reality, erasing my contributions even in his own mind. I displayed the organizational changes from the past 3 years, subtle shifts that had incrementally removed me from critical decision pathways while maintaining the appearance of executive inclusion. I recognized the pattern too late, I admitted. By the time I understood Joel was systematically reducing my influence, Cherry had already established her position and secured allies throughout the organization. Yet you maintained your own shadow systems all along, Marion noted. I nodded. An engineer's instinct for redundancy. I never expected to need these safeguards against Joel, but I've always believed in anticipating system failures before they occur. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed the fuller picture of my role in the company they thought they knew well. There's something I still don't understand, Tobias said finally. If you were this instrumental to the company's success, if you provided the initial capital and developed our core technology, why accept a subordinate position to Joel all these years? Why not claim the leadership role you clearly deserved? It was a question I'd asked myself many times, especially in recent weeks. The answer had evolved over time, but certain truths remained constant. Initially, it was love, I said simply. I believed in Joel's potential. I wanted him to succeed, to grow into the leader I thought he could become. Later, it became habit, a functional dynamic that served the company well. I looked around the table at the people who had just entrusted me with the company's future. But there was another factor. I genuinely preferred focusing on innovation rather than management. I enjoyed solving technical problems more than navigating corporate politics. Joel handled the aspects of leadership I found draining, freeing me to concentrate on work I found meaningful. William nodded with understanding. Until that arrangement began undermining the company itself. Exactly, I confirmed. When Joel and Cherry's actions began threatening our core innovations, our corporate culture, and our long-term viability. That's when I realized I could no longer remain in the background. Dr. Winters studied me for a long moment. You know, Amy, most people in your position would be focusing on revenge right now. Yet your transition plan is remarkably measured, focused entirely on company stability rather than personal vindication. I met her gaze steadily. Danfield Technologies has been my life's work for 15 years. I won't sacrifice its future to punish Joel, no matter how justified that might feel. The room fell silent again, the board members exchanging glances that communicated newfound respect and perhaps a touch of consternation at how thoroughly they had underestimated the woman now sitting at the head of the table. "Well," William said finally, "I believe we've selected exactly the right person to lead this company forward." He stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. "The board stands adjourned until our regular session next week, when we'll review the interim CEO's implementation of her transition plan." As the members filed out, Catherine Wu paused beside me. "For what it's worth," the attorney said quietly, "I suspected there was more to your role than Joel acknowledged. The technical patents were too consistent in approach to have come from different sources." I smiled slightly. "There's always someone who notices the patterns." "Indeed," she agreed, "and now everyone will." My first official act as interim CEO was calling an all-hands meeting. The company's 500 employees gathered in the main atrium, anxiety visible on their faces. Rumors had been swirling since Joel and Cherry were escorted from the building by security. Standing on the small platform usually reserved for holiday celebrations and product launches, I faced the workforce, many of whom had never heard me speak in a company-wide forum before. "As you may have heard, leadership changes have occurred at Danfield Technologies," I began, my voice steady. "The board has appointed me interim CEO while Joel Danfield has been suspended pending investigation of certain management practices." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I raised a hand for quiet. "I understand you have questions and concerns. Transparency will be a cornerstone of my leadership, so let me be clear about what's happening and why." For the next 20 minutes, I provided a measured account of the situation, the manipulation of performance data, the systematic undermining of product development, the unauthorized North Star negotiations. I omitted personal details about Joel and Cherry's relationship, focusing solely on professional misconduct. "Each department head will receive comprehensive briefing materials today," I continued. "These include an honest assessment of where we stand, the challenges we face, and our immediate priorities for correction." I gestured to the row of executives standing to my right, the remaining leadership team along with Florian, whom I'd sautié, already appointed as acting VP of Product Development. Effective immediately, we're implementing a restoration protocol with 3 primary objectives: recovering organizational health, returning to our quality standards, and realigning with our core mission of creating technology that genuinely improves patient outcomes. The atrium had grown utterly silent, hundreds of employees hanging on every word. I know many of you have been working under increasingly difficult conditions. Some of you have seen your projects sidelined, your concerns dismissed, your expertise questioned. That ends today. For the first time since beginning my address, I allowed emotion to color my voice. Danfield Technologies was built on innovation, integrity, and respect for the people who make our success possible. We're returning to those values starting now. As the meeting concluded, I noticed something unexpected. Spontaneous applause, spreading through the atrium, growing from scattered clapping to a sustained ovation. The faces before me showed relief, hope, and a cautious optimism I hadn't anticipated. The remainder of that first day passed in a blur of activity. In my newly occupied CEO office, Joel's former space now stripped of his ostentatious decorations, I met with department heads one by one, providing detailed evidence of how their areas had been affected by Joel and Cherry's manipulations. Melissa. Wells, my former deputy and short-lived replacement, sat across from me, visibly uncomfortable as I displayed Cherry's messages coaching her on undermining my division. "I had no idea," she said, genuine distress in her voice. "Cherry positioned it as modernizing our approach, making us more competitive. I never realized it was part of a larger strategy to devalue our work. I studied her carefully. You're an exceptional engineer, Melissa. That's why I hired you. But your ambition made you vulnerable to manipulation. She nodded, accepting the assessment. What happens to me now? That depends on you, I replied. I'm reinstating myself as head of product development while serving as CEO. Florian will be my second. There's a place for you on the team if you want it, but it will require rebuilding trust. Similar conversations unfolded with other executives and managers. Most had been unwitting participants in Joel's schemes, following directives without understanding the broader context. A few had been willing enablers, particularly in Cherry's executive operations division. By late afternoon, I sat with the finance team, reviewing the full damage assessment. The numbers were sobering, but not catastrophic. We've identified approximately $4.3 million in questionable expenditures over the past 6 months, reported Kevin Zhang, our CFO who had been increasingly sidelined under Joel's leadership. Most related to the European expansion and executive operations. I nodded, reviewing the detailed breakdown on my tablet. And the North Star situation? We've issued a formal cease and desist regarding any acquisition discussions, Kevin confirmed. Their CEO called personally, claiming they were merely exploratory conversations and apologizing for any misunderstanding. They're backpedaling. Now that they've lost their inside advantage, I observed. Have legal prepare documentation of all unauthorized contacts. We may need it if they attempt hostile actions. As evening fell, I found myself alone in the office, reviewing the day's progress. The immediate fires had been addressed. Cherries. Shadow executive team had been disbanded. Project priorities had been realigned. Communication channels had been restored. It was a solid start, but the deeper work remained, rebuilding the culture of innovation and trust that had been Danfield's true competitive advantage. That would take more than policy changes or organizational adjustments. It would require consistent leadership that valued substance over appearance, collaboration over control, and integrity above all. As I gathered my things to leave, Florian appeared in the doorway. The team wanted you to see this, she said, handing me a tablet. On the screen was a real-time dashboard of our healthcare monitoring system's performance metrics, the accurate, unmanipulated data now flowing freely through our systems again. Every indicator showed improvement just from the day's corrections to testing protocols and development priorities. This is what happens when we do things right, Florian said simply. I nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction replacing the day's tension. This is only the beginning. 1 week into my tenure as CEO, I sat in the boardroom preparing for my first regular board meeting. The room had been rearranged. The imposing throne-like chair Joel had installed, replaced with identical chairs. For all participants, the table reconfigured from hierarchical to collaborative. William arrived early, surveying the changes with approval. Making your mark already, I see. Small changes with meaningful impact, I replied, handing him the comprehensive report I'd prepared. The full assessment of where we stand and our path forward. As board members filed in, I noted their reactions to the document, impressed by its thoroughness, surprised by its candor about challenges we faced. The mood was serious, but optimistic as I called the meeting to order. Before we begin, there's a matter requiring immediate board attention, I announced. Our legal team has completed their preliminary investigation into Joel and Cherry's actions. Catherine Wu, our legal counsel, outlined the findings: unauthorized use of company funds, deliberate misrepresentation to the board, breach of fiduciary duty, and potential corporate espionage related to the North Star discussions. We have 3 options, I concluded after Catherine's presentation: criminal charges, civil litigation, or a negotiated separation. I presented the pros and cons of each approach without revealing my preference, allowing the board to deliberate. The discussion was thoughtful but reached the conclusion I had anticipated. A negotiated separation serves our interests best, Marion summarized. It limits public exposure, resolves the situation definitively, and allows the company to move forward without prolonged legal battles. With board authorization, I presented the terms I'd prepared. Joel would resign permanently, return all misappropriated funds, and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, we would not pursue criminal charges or publicly disclose the specific reasons for his departure. And Cherry? Dr. Winters asked. Similar terms, with additional non-compete restrictions, I replied. She presents a higher ongoing risk given her connections to North Star. The vote was unanimous, granting me authority to execute the separation agreements. With that difficult matter addressed, we moved to the future-focused portion of the agenda. I presented my vision for Danfield Technologies, not a dramatic reinvention, but a return to and strengthening of our foundational principles. Innovation. Driven by patient needs rather than market trends. Quality as a non-negotiable standard. Collaborative leadership that recognized expertise throughout the organization. The healthcare monitoring system will remain our flagship initiative, I explained, displaying the development timeline I'd restored. With proper resources and focus, we can accelerate the final regulatory approval while maintaining our quality standards. As I outlined specific strategic initiatives, I could see the board's growing confidence, not just in me, but in the company's direction. The uncertainty of recent weeks was giving way to clarity and purpose. Finally, I said, approaching the meeting's conclusion, I request that my position be changed from interim to permanent CEO, effective immediately. The vote took less than a minute. Unanimous approval. William smiled as he cast his supporting vote. The right person is finally in the right position. I nodded my thanks, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility I'd just officially assumed, and the opportunity to lead the company as it always should have been led. The negotiation with Joel took place in a neutral location, a conference room at his attorney's office downtown. I arrived with Catherine Wu and our outside counsel, prepared for resistance despite the board's unified position. Joel sat across the polished table, his appearance restored to its usual polished perfection, though shadows beneath his eyes betrayed the strain of recent days. His lawyer, an aggressively confident man in an expensive suit, flanked him on one side. Surprisingly, no sign of Cherry. Let's be clear about the situation, his attorney began. My client disputes the characterization of his actions and maintains that his leadership decisions were made in the company's best interest. I let Catherine handle the initial legal posturing while studying Joel. He avoided my gaze, his expression, a carefully constructed mask of professional detachment. The man I'd shared 15 years with now behaved like a stranger in a business transaction. When the attorneys finished their opening salvos, I spoke directly to Joel. You have two options. Sign the separation agreement with its generous terms, or we proceed with full board-approved legal action, including potential criminal charges for misappropriation of company funds. His attorney bristled. These threatening tactics aren't tactics, I interrupted calmly. Just facts. The forensic accounting is complete. The evidence is comprehensive. Your client's position is untenable. Joel finally met my eyes. You've thought of everything, haven't you? That's always been my job, I replied. You were just too busy taking credit to notice. A flicker of genuine emotion, anger, perhaps regret, crossed his face before the mask returned. He nodded to his attorney, who reluctantly pushed the agreement forward. I want one modification, Joel said as he uncapped his pen. A public statement acknowledging my contributions to Danfield's success. I considered this briefly. The press release will state that you're stepping down to pursue other opportunities after 15 years of helping build the company. No specific wrongdoing will be mentioned. That's as generous as we get. He signed without further comment. 3. Next day, I called a meeting with those who'd been most affected by Joel and Cherry's actions, the core product development team that had weathered the systematic undermining of their work. The separation agreements are signed, I announced to the assembled engineers. Joel and Cherry are officially gone. Now we rebuild. Florian spoke for the group. What about the organizational changes they implemented? The reassignments, the sidelined projects, the compromised standards? We're conducting a comprehensive review, I explained. Some changes were actually beneficial and will remain. Others will be reversed immediately. I need each of you to provide your assessment of what's working and what isn't in your areas. And the people they brought in? Someone asked. Cherry's connections who got positioned throughout the company? Everyone will be evaluated on merit and contribution, I said firmly. No mass purges, no guilt by association. Those who demonstrate competence and integrity stay. Those who don't will be transitioned out appropriately. I moved to the whiteboard, outlining the priorities for the next 30 days. Restoring proper development protocols, reestablishing quality standards, rebuilding collaborative processes across departments, and accelerating our healthcare monitoring system toward FDA approval. This won't be easy, I acknowledged. There's damage to repair, not just to projects and processes, but to trust. That will take time and consistent action. I looked around at the team that had persevered through the chaos of recent months. But I've seen what this group can accomplish, even under the worst circumstances. Imagine what you'll achieve now. As the meeting concluded, Florian lingered behind. The team needed this, she said quietly. Not just the plan, but seeing you fully in charge. It makes it real that things actually are changing. I nodded, understanding the importance of visible leadership during transition. The hard work is just beginning, but for the first time in months, we're all pulling in the same direction again. 1 month after taking the helm at Danfield Technologies, I stood at the podium addressing our first company-wide Innovation Summit, a new quarterly gathering I'd instituted to align our teams and celebrate progress. The main conference hall was filled to capacity, the energy palpable as employees from every department came together. Behind me, a simple slide displayed our refreshed company mission: advancing healthcare through technology that serves patients. First, for 15 years, I began, Danfield has created innovative medical technologies. Today, we're recommitting to the principles that drove our best work: rigorous science, ethical practices, and genuine collaboration. I clicked to the next slide, showing our healthcare monitoring system's core metrics, all trending positively since the leadership change. In just 4 weeks, we've restored proper development protocols, realigned our priorities with patient outcomes, and accelerated our flagship project while maintaining quality standards. This isn't just a return to form, it's an evolution of what Danfield can and should be. The room's attention was focused and engaged, a marked contrast to the tense, distracted atmosphere that had characterized company meetings in recent months. Today, I'm announcing 3 initiatives that will define our path forward, I continued, revealing each with a simple slide. First, the Danfield Innovation Lab, a cross-disciplinary team with protected time and resources to explore breakthrough ideas without immediate commercial pressure. True innovation requires space for exploration and even failure. The announcement generated excited murmurs, particularly among our technical staff who had chafed under Joel's increasingly short-term focus. Second, our ethical technology framework, comprehensive. Guidelines ensuring our innovations serve patient needs first, with privacy, accessibility, and inclusivity built into every design decision. I saw nods of approval throughout the room. Our company had always attracted people who wanted their work to make a meaningful difference. Finally, our collaborative leadership model, flattening unnecessary hierarchies, implementing transparent decision processes, and ensuring every team member has a voice in their domain of expertise. This drew spontaneous applause, the most visceral reaction to the systematic dismantling of the control-focused culture Joel and Cherry had installed. These aren't just idealistic concepts, I emphasized as the room quieted. Each initiative includes specific implementation plans, resource allocations, and accountability measures, detailed in the materials being distributed to your departments today. I paused, looking out at the assembled team that represented 15 years of my professional life. The healthcare monitoring system remains our top priority, with FDA submission now back on track for next quarter. But how we achieve our goals matters as much as the goals themselves. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined our revised strategic roadmap, not a complete reinvention, but a thoughtful rebalancing of commercial objectives and technological innovation, immediate market opportunities, and long-term research investments. As I concluded, I stepped away from the podium, deliberately removing the barrier between myself and the team. I've always believed Danfield's greatest strength is the people who make innovation possible, the engineers solving seemingly impossible problems, the quality teams ensuring patient safety, the support staff keeping everything running smoothly. Starting today, our company structure will reflect that reality. I gestured to the executive team seated in the front row. Leadership exists to remove obstacles, provide resources, and create the conditions for your best work. My door is always open, not just as a saying, but as a practice. The summit transitioned to breakout sessions where teams could engage directly with the new initiatives, ask questions, and begin implementation planning. As I moved through the groups, the change was tangible: energy replacing resignation, collaboration overtaking competition, purpose reconnecting with passion. Danfield Technologies wasn't just surviving its leadership crisis. It was being reborn, stronger and more aligned with its original mission than ever before. 3 months. Into my leadership of Danfield Technologies, the transformation was becoming evident not just in policies and projects, but in people. The executive floor, once an isolated kingdom under Joel's reign, now buzzed with collaborative energy as barriers between departments dissolved. Most surprising was Melissa Wells, my former deputy whose ambition had made her vulnerable to manipulation by Joel and Cherry. After our frank conversation on my first day as CEO, I'd offered her a choice: leave with a fair severance or rebuild trust in a redesigned role focusing on her technical strengths. She'd chosen to stay, accepting a position leading our newly formed regulatory innovation team, a critical function, but one step removed from the advancement track she'd previously pursued so aggressively. Today, she stood in my office doorway with an unexpected request. "I'd like your feedback on something," she said, placing a document on my desk. "It's a comprehensive analysis of how our monitoring system could be adapted for pediatric patients, a market we've never fully explored." I scanned the proposal, impressed by its thoroughness and creativity. "This is excellent work, Melissa. When did you find time for this?" "Evenings, weekends," she admitted with a small smile. I needed to remind myself why I became an engineer. In the first place, the change in her was remarkable, the political calculation replaced by genuine passion, the latter climbing by meaningful contribution. "Submit this through the Innovation Lab," I told her. "It deserves full consideration." As she left, Tobias arrived for our weekly check-in. As a board member who had initially allied with Joel, his adjustment to my leadership had been particularly telling. "The Q3 numbers are finalized," he reported, taking a seat. "We've recovered faster than projected. The healthcare monitoring system is exceeding every benchmark." "The team deserves the credit," I replied. "They just needed the right support and direction." Tobias nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I owe you an apology, Amy. I accepted Joel's characterization of your division without proper verification. That was a failure of my fiduciary responsibility. We all have blind spots, Tobias. The question is whether we learn from them." "Indeed." He paused. The other board members and I have been discussing governance improvements to prevent similar situations in the future. More robust information verification, balanced reporting requirements, direct access to department heads beyond the CEO's filtering. His evolution from Joel's ally to a more diligent, independent board member represented exactly the kind of systemic improvement the company needed. Even more unexpected was the transformation in our executive suite's physical environment. The imposing mahogany furniture and status symbols Joel had favored were gone, replaced by a flexible, collaborative space where teams could gather easily. Florian had taken the initiative to convert the rarely used executive conference room into an innovation hub, walls covered with whiteboard paint, comfortable seating arranged for conversation rather than hierarchy, and most importantly, engineers and executives working side by side without artificial barriers. I watched through the glass wall as she facilitated a problem-solving session, bringing together perspectives from different disciplines with natural authority and inclusive leadership. Her growth from technical expert to emerging leader had accelerated once her talents were recognized and supported. Perhaps most telling was the evolution in William. Though he maintained his board chairman role, his approach had shifted from patriarchal oversight to genuine partnership. Today we met not in a formal setting but over lunch in the company cafe, discussing future possibilities with renewed energy. "I haven't seen the company this aligned since our early days," he observed, watching teams interact around us. "There's something powerful about having leadership that understands both the technology and the human elements." "It's not just me," I pointed out. "It's what happens when people feel valued for their actual contributions rather than their position or connections." William nodded, a hint of wistfulness in his expression. "I wish I'd recognized sooner what was happening with Joel. Perhaps if I'd been more attentive." "We all missed signs we should have seen," I said gently. "What matters is learning and moving forward." Around us, Danfield Technologies was doing exactly that, evolving into the company it was always meant to be. 6 months marked a meaningful milestone in my leadership of Danfield Technologies. On this crisp autumn morning, the executive team gathered to review our comprehensive progress report before sharing it with the full company. "The healthcare monitoring system received final FDA approval yesterday," Florian announced, unable to suppress her smile. 3 weeks ahead of our revised schedule with 0 compliance issues flagged." Applause broke out around the conference table. This wasn't just a product approval, it was validation of our renewed commitment to excellence. The quarterly financial results told an equally compelling story. After the initial disruption following Joel's departure, we'd not only stabilized but exceeded projections across all major metrics. Our stock had recovered its losses and climbed to an all-time high as market analysts recognized the company's strengthened foundation. "The organizational health assessment shows the most dramatic improvement," noted our new HR director, displaying comparative results from before and after the leadership change. Employee satisfaction had increased by 47%. Turnover had dropped from concerning levels to well below industry average. Internal innovation submissions had tripled. "We've retained 94% of the technical talent that was at risk of departure," she continued, "including all of our most senior engineers." The transformation extended beyond numbers and metrics. Walking through the building, I could feel the difference. In energy, collaborative discussions replacing guarded interactions, cross-functional teams solving problems together, a renewed sense of purpose visible in how people approached their work. Most gratifying was the impact on our actual users. The first patients to receive our healthcare monitoring system were already reporting life-changing improvements in managing chronic conditions. Medical professionals praised the intuitive design and reliable performance, attributes that had been compromised under Joel's push for flashier but less functional features. In a quiet moment between meetings, William joined me by the window overlooking the Seattle skyline. "You've accomplished more in 6 months than most CEOs achieve in years," he observed. The foundation was always there, I replied. We just needed to remove the obstacles and realign with our core purpose. He nodded thoughtfully. Joel called me last week. This surprised me. Joel had maintained absolute silence since signing the separation agreement. What did he want? To tell me he's accepted a position with a startup in Boston. William's expression was complex, the lingering disappointment of a father tempered with cautious hope. He sounded different, more reflective. He asked about you. What did you tell him? The truth. That you've proven to be exactly the leader this company always needed. I turned back to the window, watching clouds drift across the Seattle sky. The company that Joel had tried to take from me was now thriving under my direction, its future brighter than ever before. Some might call it vindication. I preferred to see it as restoration, of vision, of values, of potential long deferred, but finally realized. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.